Hello and good afternoon. My name is Wu-Rorrer, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Tips and Tricks for Middle School and High School TSA Competitive Events. This webinar is the second installment of a specially designed professional development webinar series focused on technology and engineering education best practices for leading integrative STEM education within your school. It is a pleasure to talk with you about the TSA Competitive Events program. I hope that you enjoyed the slideshow of images taken of my students during their competitions and activities at the conferences over the past few years. As with all of my presentations, I will try my best to make the information presented practical to the audience. Although I am a lifelong scholar, I far more prefer to be a practitioner. This is evident as we progress through the webinar today, as I will provide you with practical, timely, tested competitive events, tips and tricks that you can use in your middle school or high school TSA chapter. So to begin, let me clarify the proper pronunciation of my name. Keep it simple. Woo and roar, like a lion. If you can't get it or can't remember, just do your best Scooby-Doo impersonation and say, Dr. Wu-Rorrer. No worries, I'm used to it. I work with middle school students on a regular basis. So, now that has been clarified, I have included a picture of my kids a few years ago, as they are a simple reminder of why I do all the things that I do each and every day. They are my motivation, my reason to do my best, my pride and joys. Please remember, no matter how much you want a program to succeed, never forget what it all comes back to, the kids. Whether it is taking care of your own or someone else's, always keep their best interests as your top priority. In all of my presentations or classes, I like to present an outline of what is covered and how long we will be on each subject. I respect that you have taken time out of your schedule to attend this webinar. In return, I will stick to the times provided and have things wrapped up within the hour. As you can see, I plan to go back to the basics of Dr. Kemp's teaching methods course, and that you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, then you tell them what you just told them. If things go well, fourth part will allow me to then ask questions in order to verify that the information was communicated correctly. So let's begin. The goal of each online professional development webinar will be to provide proven instructional strategies and ideas that you can use to support your efforts in delivering the best possible instruction for all students to become technologically and engineering literate. For this presentation, my goal is to provide you with practical, easy-to-use tips and tricks for both middle school and high school TSA competitive events. This workshop will focus on 3 areas related to tips and tricks for middle school and high school TSA competitive events. After completing the overview of the presentation, we will discuss about number 1, making the connection between the classroom instruction and TSA competitive events without actually teaching to the event. Number 2, I will provide practical examples used in preparing students for TSA competitive events. And number 3, time-saving strategies on how advisors can maximize community resources to operate successful TSA programs. So, what is my philosophy on education? What drives me? Why do I do the things the way that I do? How do I know the students have actually learned what I'm teaching? Well, with a strong background in career and technical education and personal experiences within multiple career and tech student organizations, my philosophy on education is based heavily on experiential learning and the integration of new and innovative technologies that provide a higher value for learning by youth. I firmly believe that the knowledge given to a student in the classroom is only the beginning of the student's education. It is not until a student has had the hands-on, real-world experiences provided by CTSOs like TSA that the concepts learned in the classroom are fully understood and applied. This philosophy is prevalent throughout all of my work and educational experiences. So, what got me to this point? Why am I sharing my tips and tricks with you here today? What am I basing my strategies and techniques on? How do you know that I even have a clue about what I am presenting? Why should I continue to even give this guy the time of day, you may be asking? All of these are very good questions. Well, let's start with what got me here and go from there. The field of education has always been an important part of my life. I have continually challenged myself within the many disciplines of career and technical education and worked with various organizations in the planning and developing of programs on the regional, state, and national levels. My continued relationships and involvement with hundreds of businesses and professional organizations throughout the U.S. over the past 2 decades has allowed me the unique opportunity to coordinate various educational programs, workshops, and trainings of all sizes. I am currently a technology and engineering education teacher and a TSA advisor at the Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School and George Mason High School, and serve as the City of Falls Church School Systems Curriculum and Instruction Resource Teacher in Career and Technical Education. During my summer breaks, I write tests and case studies for multiple CTSOs at the state and national levels. Since 1999, I have also served as a faculty member in the Sustainable Landscapes program at the George Washington University, focusing on the use of plant materials and sustainable landscape practices within the Mid-Atlantic region. In 2015, I completed my doctoral degree in educational leadership with an emphasis on STEM integration in middle school and career and technical education programs. Prior to my current teaching position, I served as the educational specialist at the National FBLA headquarters in Reston, Virginia, literally right next door to TSA and ITEEA. Going back even further, I served as a 4-H extension agent and as an FFA advisor. I bring up all this information to share with you so that you're aware that I base the examples and suggestions in this presentation upon a multitude of best practices in multiple organizations, not just one. Although the presentation is focused on TSA specifically, the practices and examples provided are easily transferable to other CTSOs and like organizations. Before we dig into the core of the presentation, I must ask a simple question. Why are we doing competitive events in the first place? Are you wanting to provide your students with an opportunity to apply the theories learned in the classroom in a hands-on competitive activity? Do you enjoy the success of the students? Do you enjoy traveling? Or did your administrator say that you had to do it? Or is it that you simply don't have anything else better to do with your time? Whatever your motivation, you are here now and you want to learn more. Now that we've established the why, let's address the who, what, when, where, and how. In order to make the connection between the classroom instruction and TSA competitive events without teaching to the event, we must address the who and where first. At the most basic level, the competition begins when the student is first introduced to the idea of taking the theories and skills learned within the classroom. They want to test themselves against other like-minded students in various competitive events. They select the events that they find most interesting, useful, and fun. At this point, the students begin to review the guidelines, rating sheets, YouTube videos, and basically Google any relevant information that they can find. In addition to conducting career exploration activities and leadership challenges within my classroom, I provide the rubrics for the events such as Dragster, Flight, Inventions and Innovations, Video Game Design, On-Demand Video, Community Service, and Bex Robotics to the students as they begin work on their classroom projects. The beauty of the rubrics are that they are generic enough in most cases so as to allow more creativity among the students and the ability to apply the local spin to things. We must remember that all CTSOs, TSA included, are all co-curricular components of career and technical education programs, not extracurricular or after-school clubs. This is a point that I have had to make clear to certain stakeholders of our program on a pretty regular basis. We are required to implement the leadership, career exploration, and competitive events into our curriculum. How each chapter chooses to do this is up to you. Moving forward in the presentation, I would like to talk about a few practical examples that I have used in preparing members for TSA competitive events without actually teaching to the event and making the connection. Please understand, there's a fine line between doing what is best for all students versus teaching to the event. I have consistently seen advisors in various CTSOs conduct the drill and kill exercises during their class. The issue with this is that only a small handful of students benefit from such a practice. As sad and infuriating as it may be, it still happens way too often. I was fortunate enough during my time at FBLA to see the best practices year in and year out. Since I was an ally, not a direct competitor with many of the advisors, I was able to speak with them about their experiences, strategies, and techniques that they used to prepare their students for competition without them fearing that I would basically steal their trade secrets. What I found and have implemented in my own program is the best practices of teaching the content to all, providing enough time within the classroom instruction for application, and then an after-school system in which the students can further expand upon their work with more directed involvement from myself and from their event coaches. In addressing how I teach to all students while still managing to offer the competitive event members what they need, I usually provide just enough time for the students to successfully complete the foundations for each project. For those who are more advanced, I have them to teach and support the work of other students who may or may not be progressing as fast as they are. The culture I advocate is one in which everyone succeeds. If you are successful, help others be successful. The best way to learn something is to teach it. Not only do you have to learn the content the first time, then you have to review it to determine what others may need to learn from it. Once that takes place, you put together a plan for teaching it, then you teach it. At this point, you have went through the content at least 4 times. It's what we do as teachers all the time. For many students, though, it takes 3 to 4 times of seeing the information in order to truly understand it. On the other side, I tell my students who are struggling, success breeds success. If you surround yourself with enough successful people, replicate what they are doing, and follow their examples, you are much more likely to be successful. I have found this strategy to be very useful and productive. Each time, the students almost always provide quality products. For the students competing at the next level, they are going to need more time than what I provide in class. They must ultimately take ownership to their work outside of the classroom instruction. This forces them to become even more resourceful in how they manage their time and their energies. Now, as is tradition with all of my presentations, I am going to have everyone to take a short 30-second break in order for you to stretch, move around, grab a snack, or whatever you may need to do. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I hope that was beneficial to everyone. Now let's proceed with the next topic in the presentation, practical examples used in preparing students for TSA competitive events. This is the time in which we will focus on the how. One of the things that students learn in my tech ed classes is the importance of systems and how they work. Preparing students for competition ultimately comes down to developing the right systems for your chapter. Somewhere along the way, as your chapter grows, you will begin to realize that what you once could handle on your own or between 2 advisors has now gotten to be a lot more difficult. Each chapter is going to be uniquely different. You and your fellow advisors will need to tweak things to align them with your chapter's resources, needs, abilities, and even more so, the number of students that you have in competition. What I have found is that once you reach certain thresholds where the number of systems you have to implement will actually double at each new level. This normally takes place when the numbers are around 12, 24, and 48 plus members competing. Once you hit 24, it simply becomes a numbers game. You need to have, say, X amount of adult chaperones or coaches designated to work and direct the students' efforts. In the 2 chapters that I serve as an advisor in, the ratios that we found to be about right is about 1 adult per 6 members for the middle school level, and about 1 adult to 8 members in the high school level. With smaller chapters, though, these ratios can be even smaller due to the limited availability of resources. I will talk later about how to go about getting parents and volunteers for your chapter, but for now, I wanted to focus strictly on the systems. Remember the old adage, systems run the business, but ultimately people run the systems. As you begin to build and improve your systems, it is important to do an assessment of what you truly need, when you will need it, and why it is important to your chapter. Within TSA, members are allowed to compete in multiple events. This is not the case with most CTSOs. As such, trying to figure out the schedule of when students need to be at a certain event and determining the schedule conflicts that may come up becomes way too much for one person to handle once you hit a certain level. For every event, I prepare a template with all the events that students will be competing in. This is done well in advance of the conference. Always include the preliminary and final events, regardless of whether I think the students will make it to the finals or not. When I'm on site, I'm able to mark through the individual events that if students don't make it, I just simply X through it, and if they do, I put in the times and potential conflicts that they may have. That way the next day, whenever they go to sign up for their time, they already know in advance whether they need to do an early session, late session, or if they have flexibility within that. I am happy to share the template with you. Just send me an email. Now, how can I make this relate a little bit better? Let's think of this in relationship to your fundraising efforts. How much does a $500 fundraiser benefit a chapter when it is being divided between 10, 20, or even 50 competitors? The same holds true for volunteers and coaches. They can only do so much. Remember the ratios we discussed earlier? This is where it comes into play again. So what works best? Ultimately, it comes down to trial and error. There truly is no perfect formula, just good old-fashioned systems of researching, planning, creating, and evaluating. In each chapter, you will need to go through the process multiple times to determine what will work best for you. Once you have your system figured out, be willing to change each and every year. There is no status quo. I personally had to do this last year when our chapter went from having 6 members competing at nationals to 16. I am glad that I did. Had I stuck to the same old systems that had been in place for the previous 2 years, things would have turned out very, very badly. I was able to give up some of the control and began to delegate out much more of the responsibility of the parent chaperones. This was key. Remember, stick to the ratios. There is a reason why you created them in the first place, right? Now, I have to admit that I can be a bit on the obsessive side of things when it comes to attention to details, but you got to remember, when you have accepted the responsibility to take students to the conference, you have also accepted the obligation to make sure that things are properly planned out and ensure that the members have the best possible experience that they can. Let's move on. I wanted to share my experiences with Google Apps. Now, before the discussion about the positives and negatives of Google, I am simply sharing my experiences and the versatility of how they work. There are other options out there in which members can collaborate. In our school system, we use Google Apps. I recommend Google Apps, whether it be Google Docs, Sheets, or Presentation, based primarily on 2 features. The first is the ability of the members and advisors to work collaboratively on the same file at the same time. It is amazing of how much more productive things can be when you're not having to figure out which version you were on and who did what. I do caution you, though, to make sure that you don't forget the human part of this all, the need to actually talk and communicate verbally, not just with a keyboard. I have had to intervene at times past when my students have been working on projects and literally will be sitting with each other and not communicating verbally. It's a new world, one in which the students are more accustomed to typing their information rather than actually sharing it verbally with one another. You have to bring back the human component of it. Make them talk. I have found this to be one of the biggest challenges for me to personally overcome as a teacher. Now, this leads me into the second feature that I enjoy using, the history of the document. When you are in a Google app, you can go up to the top header and see the history of the file by clicking on All Changes Saved in Drive or Updated and listed with a certain time. When you do this, a new window opens up and displays the history of changes made to the file. If you select any of the dates or times, it will highlight the work that was completed or modified and will actually list the students' names of who actually made the change. This feature allows me to passively view what is taking place among the members, who is doing what, and to provide timely feedback at the appropriate times. It can also serve as a means for watching out for the students. In one instance, I had a young lady who was extremely committed to her TSA event. One night while I was needing a break from writing my dissertation, I went in and started reviewing some of the students' work. Well, lo and behold, this young lady was working on her project at 2 a.m. in the morning. As you might imagine, I was at a loss for words. I ended up typing a simple message to her in the document: go to sleep. Within 10 seconds, I got a response back from her. Yes, Mr. Wu-Rorrer. Sorry. ... Please don't tell my parents that I was up so late working on this. Well, I did end up telling her parents, and have used it as an example ever since. For every team event, I require team members to log their hours and activities in a Google spreadsheet. This example is from one of my middle school geospatial technology teams. You will see that it includes the dates, tasks, time spent, and the members who did the work, comments, and the total number of hours. As a general rule of thumb, I require the team members to complete a minimum of 50 hours collectively prior to allowing them to submit their work for regionals. For state, this amount doubles to 100 hours and 150 hours for nationals. I have found these hour requirements to be the absolute minimum for students to be competitive at each level. Now, keep in mind that there are multiple ways in which the students can achieve these hours. Later in the presentation, I will discuss how to leverage your resources to prepare students for things such as science fair projects, science Olympiad competitions, CAS projects for IB diploma programs if you have that, and so forth and so on. Now, some of you may ask if that is fair to use one project to make another. Isn't that plagiarism? Well, if a student is taking the same work, not modifying it, and submitting it as original work, then yes, it is self-plagiarism. However, I emphasize early in the school year for students to base their competitive events upon a project that they may do as a part of another club or class. Think about it. They are able to conduct the research in one of the previously mentioned groups, practice their speeches, and use that information to serve as a foundation for the TSA project. If they do it properly and have completed all the research, their activities for both groups will have a common theme. This approach gives the students the opportunity to maximize their time and leverage the resources or services of other groups and their volunteer bases while opening up time and not having to build the foundation. It's already there. I have found that if I check the time logs on a regular basis and provide routine feedback, time logs become one of the most important tools that I have in my TSA Advisor's toolbox. The members normally want to make you happy and show you that they are committed. In a few cases, I've used the time logs to talk with members about their level of participation or the lack thereof, and the disparity between their commitment and that of the other members. It is very hard for them and their parents to argue with the numbers. I can never emphasize enough the value of time logs. Not only are they a required component in most TSA events, they provide a clear picture to the judge as to what has been completed and when. As a past judge, one of the first things that I always look at is the time logs. Seeing a team with work completed over multiple months versus the past 2 weeks really goes a long way in my decision-making process. I am happy to also share this template with anyone that would like. As stated before, just send me an email. I would like to now transition into the final part of the webinar, time-saving strategies on how advisors can maximize community resources to operate successful competitive events within a TSA program. To do this, we need to break down the meaning of this section. First, we must define what is meant by community resources. Secondly, I will provide very specific examples of the resources. And lastly, I will demonstrate how you can then develop strategies based upon the availability of those resources within your community. Before we can look at the strategies, we need to be able to fully understand what is meant by community resources. I define community resources under three broad categories: human, financial, and network. Human resources are going to be your parents, coaches, volunteers, supporters, colleagues, etc. Basically anyone who is willing to donate their time in order to help your TSA members develop. Financial resources are going to be things such as sponsorships, cash donations, or even in-kind donations. Lastly is network resources. In simple terms, who do you know and who do they know? Ultimately, why do you need a strong network? How do you build a strong network? The benefit of having a strong network in place comes into play when you are needing to support your students. As stated before, there is only so much you can do by yourself. You need to leverage the time and efforts of others and not feel guilty about that. There is nothing wrong with asking others to help and to ask them to ask others. With regards to this presentation, the human resources that I am discussing are individuals who are willing to donate their time in order to help TSA members develop. When I began to build our chapters, I focused my efforts on securing individuals for three distinct areas: key stakeholders, internal resources, and external resources. For the key stakeholders, I focused on the individuals that would typically make up a chapter's advisory council. This includes parents, school administration, central office staff, a school board member or two, city council members, county supervisors, and industry or business leaders and owners with a direct connection to the program and chapter. These are your go-to resources. They're there for you each and every time that you need them. They support your every effort, provide financial assistance at times, and assist with coaching teams, chaperoning events, managing the fundraising efforts, and set up the meeting rooms, coordinate with other volunteers. The list goes on and on. They're the ones that you rely on heavily each and every day. I've now gotten to the point where about 60 to 80% of the chapter's operations are managed by these individuals. This is the one area that I concentrate a bulk of my time on managing and do not delegate out to others. For internal resources, I focused on fellow teachers, specialists, the community outreach coordinator, science fair coordinators, and the key club coordinator. You will need to look at your school and school system and the staff that you have to determine which ones should be added to your list. The one thing that I must emphasize, though, is the belief in you take care of those who take care of you. This means that if you plan to reach out for support of your program, be willing to return the favor. The best example that I can give is what I do in my program. As stated earlier in the presentation, my student members will sometimes use their science fair projects to serve as the foundation for their TSA project. They get the support of the science teachers and the science fair coordinator, time that you don't have to invest at this point. In return, I always volunteer to be a judge at the science fair. Not only does it give me an opportunity to visually see where the students are with their work, it also allows me to identify other potential projects and students that I think might benefit from TSA Competitive Events program the following year. Another example that I can use is in regards to the Children's Stories event. Since TSA now has the event at the middle school and high school level, I have managed to get one of our school's English teachers to work with both teams on the content and structure. In addition, the art teacher has been recruited by the students themselves to advise on the artwork and graphics for the story. Although the first year was a challenge, I've already have teams working on the stories early for this year. For external resources, I focused on our STEM volunteer network, alumni, fraternal organizations, cooperatives, military recruiters and their outreach specialists, government agencies, and the city or county extension service. I have been successful in the past few years of having a steady stream of supporters and volunteers from these groups of individuals. Just like anything in life, you will spend a lot of time building things to get it just right. However, do you have a plan of how you will maintain the system after you reach your goal? I find this to be the key to continuing the success of a chapter. I like to use the analogy of a baseball farm team system. You have your star players playing at the top level, but you always have the need to have others that are getting practice, albeit, on a more limited basis, lined up so that whenever something does happen, you can move them up at any time to help out the team. Now, being a middle school and high school chapter advisor, I'm always looking for ways to get the high school members to come back and help the younger members. This is part of the farm team system. That is the culture and the expectations that I've established from day one. The same thing can be said of the high school students reaching out to college students who are alumni. Think about how much help they could do during their holiday or spring breaks. Sometimes they're looking for things to do. Even if they can't coach a team, leverage their time to come in. Have them to provide content-specific workshops or develop systems to help the other student members. The simple strategy accounts for about a third of my volunteer coaching base each and every year. Not only is it effective, it will also take some of the pressure off of you as the advisor so that you can allocate your time to complete other tasks. For the next few minutes, I would like to share a few areas that I focus on each year when it comes to maximizing the financial community resources. I teach in a smaller school district that is surrounded by two of the largest school district systems in the state of Virginia. Due to the limited resources that our district has, we are not able to go out and solicit many of the larger donations, grants, and sponsorships that are given when the activity or project benefits multiple schools. This became abundantly clear my first year that I started fundraising for our chapter. Our school system policy limits what we can do for fundraisers and which products are sold. By the time I started, most of the common fundraisers were already taken, so I had to be really creative. We truly struggled that first year in that we focused our efforts mainly on restaurant fundraisers and group gatherings such as laser tag. Considering we had very little investment of time and materials in each of these events, they did provide a decent amount of funds and great marketing for the program. We simply just could not get enough of the financial amounts that we needed for the program. This ended up forcing me to reconsider what we were doing. When I put together a comprehensive budget 2 years ago, it was determined that the total cost for a chapter with roughly 30 members competing at the regional and state levels and having 15 members to go on to nationals would run us right around about $40,000 per year. When you consider that amount against the $200 to $300 that you make for a restaurant fundraiser, the challenge just seemed way too much to overcome with the systems that we had in place. We had to change, and we did. Over the past few years, we have slowly increased our cash donations, submitted more grants, and solicited more sponsorships from local businesses. For the cash donations, we focus our efforts on parents and community. We normally do this through a GoFundMe project or something similar to that to get the supplies for the competition or to cover the cost of transportation. We keep it simple and focus on one or two line items and go from there. This is a minor percentage of our efforts and budget each year, though. We have started the process of receiving a few grants along the way to help fill in the gaps, but we do not declare this a reliable source of funding. If we get them, great, but if we don't count them into things each year. For the in-kind donations, though, one of the examples that I can give is that we conduct a silent auction each year in conjunction with the school musical. The musical is one of the largest gatherings within our community, so it allows us to reach a lot of people in a short amount of time period. This is an example of leveraging of time and resources. One might ask how I was able to accomplish this. Well, my presentation to the musical director was quite simple. Our chapter provides the technical crew for the production show, correct? Aren't they just as much a part of the musical as the actors and actresses? Yes. So why shouldn't we be able to host a fundraiser at the event where our members are involved? As it is, we were able to do it and have been rather successful each year, bringing in a total of over $8,000 profit just last year during the 4 days of the show. Now, for the sponsorships, we start during the summer by sending out thank you letters to our current program sponsors and new invitation letters to potential sponsors. In each letter, we include the previous year's accolades and a press release from the national conference. In return for their sponsorships, the businesses get their logo on the back of the chapter t-shirts that the kids wear at different times throughout the year. We have designated days in which they will wear those to show chapter unity, but then they also wear them to the state and national competitions. We also promote the businesses in all of our publications, in particular the monthly newsletter that goes out to the entire school. We use an email distribution system for this to track the effectiveness of our emails and to share with the businesses of how many views we get and how many click-throughs we get. For most of the newsletters, we get normally average about 200 opens with multiple click-throughs in each of those. Now, before you begin to do something similar, make sure you check with your school system to determine if they allow such practices. Since we just talked about sponsorships and their values, it is a great tie-in to our next discussion, developing a strong network. Although it may take more time initially to set up a strong network and put it in motion, the time saved will almost always outweigh the time that's been spent. For most of us, we have developed our network base and continue to build upon it. I addressed many of the individuals earlier in the human resource section, so I will not be talking too much about the traditional network that you build, that you develop for your day-to-day operations. Rather, I'd like to offer another option for building your network. Over the years, I have continued to build my social media presence and that of the programs. I do my best to keep the two separate, though. Now, I don't intend to talk about all the great things that social media can do. Rather, I plan to focus on one or two things that can help make social media work for you. I realize that there are a lot of teachers who simply feel overwhelmed by social media. I'm truly one of those as well. Well, the reality is that unless you're an individual that is always on, social media is very overwhelming. For myself, I fall in between two generations and have only taken to social media in the form of how can I actually benefit it, not from the purpose of staying in touch with all of my friends and letting them know what I had for dinner last night. There's nothing wrong with this at all, don't get me wrong. I simply just don't have time to invest in social media at that level. Rather, I have chosen to use social media to distribute information that I want others to know in order to promote myself or the program. For those of you who want to be more effective with reaching your network and don't have a lot of time to spend on it, I would highly recommend that you spend a little bit of time over the next week or so to review some of the social media dashboards. Examples being, or the three that I think of right off, Hootsuite, Social Oomph, and Buffer. The dashboard program, or what the dashboard program allows you to do, is to communicate your messages over multiple social media sites in one central location. Basically, you put in the content that you're trying to get out, and then it helps to format it in whichever social media that you're sending it out to, and then with the click of one button, it goes out to all the different sites. The beauty of it also is that most of the dashboards will allow you to set up the messages in advance so that whenever you're on site for a conference, you can simply update the information and send it out as needed. Since it's pre-programmed, it goes out to all the sites that you've selected without you having to go into each and every one of those sites and type the information, thus saving you lots of precious sleep time or time with your students on site. Now, I personally use Hootsuite, but all three will work just as well. It's just a matter of what you prefer to use. Sort of like the question of, are you a PC or a Mac person? You like Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts? Pepsi or Coke? Okay, you get the point. So try out a few of them and see which one works best for you and your program. As this presentation is now coming to a close, and before we strike up the band for the final performance, I would like for you to take a moment and think about what you will take away from this presentation. If you would, please jot down 2, maybe 3 takeaways that you believe will be useful for you that you learned from this presentation. While you're doing that, I'm going to begin compiling the list of questions that have came in and that you have sent over. If you have not already, please send them to me either through the chat located here or via email. If I don't get to your question today, definitely I will go in, and if you send it via email, I'll respond back to you as well. After the webinar, I would also greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide. I believe a survey will be sent out afterwards, and that way you can respond back to it as well.